I'm going to start off with my with just a line segment from my tools, and I'm going to draw just a line segment up here near the top, and then I want to make it like, let's make it like 18 points or something like that, nice and thick, and duplicate it a little further down the page and make it maybe 2 points, something along those lines. So the first tool I want to look at is the blend command, and it is available from your tools menu. It's actually this icon right here, but it's also available from the object menu. And if I select the two of these objects, go up here to my object menu, down to blend, I can make. And depending upon whatever the last setting, you may not get the exact same results that I've got here, and that's okay. I'm going to show you how to do this. But basically what blend does is it takes multiple objects and it creates the intermediary steps between them based upon the parameter, on the information you give it. So this is what I got. Like I said, you probably didn't, you may not have gotten the same thing. You may have gotten just a single middle weight line across the middle, but we can fix that pretty easily by going back here to the object menu with that object selected. Go down to blend and select blend options. And it should bring up this dialog. And I'm going to change it from smooth color to specified steps. And right now mine's set to 38. So I can drop that down. Maybe I drop it down to 12. Just sort of click on these objects. And I can create a blend of different objects this way. I just did it with 2, but I can do it with as many different objects as I want. It'll blend them in the order that they are, in the layer order that they're in. So that's the basis of the blend options. Yeah.
When I duplicated the first line and then I pressed make, it didn't work.
What do you mean it didn't work?
I must have missed a step.
Can you just copy and paste it? Copy the original line, paste it, move it down the page. That'll work too. So we can, if I just place my cursor in there, I can increase or decrease those number of steps as well, however I want to. And there's some other settings here. Smooth color, we'll try to blend them relatively smoothly. I kind of prefer specifying the number of steps. If I want a smooth blend, I can add, I just increase the number of steps in there. But when I'm done with that, if I take a look at it, if I go do out Command Y, it's still just those 2 initial shapes, those 2 initial paths that I made. So that's why I say this is all appearance based. And I can expand this if I want to, just by Object Expand. And it'll make individual strokes. And then if I expand it again, it'll make filled shapes. So I'm gonna undo those last steps. I want to go back to the full blend. Yeah, I want to be back like this. And take a look at, if I grab my direct select tool, I can also grab the individual shapes and move them around and kind of shift the way that looks. And let me see. This should work. So by default, this is just a straight line, the path that creates that blend. But if I draw another, I'll just grab my pen tool and draw another path out here. If I select my original blend and that path both, I can go back to my object menu, down to blend, and I can replace that spline, the spine of it. Choose replace spine, and it'll wrap that blend along a curved path. And I can still go into this and edit that spline. It shows up in here. So I can still kind of fine tune this if I want to, modify it, do whatever I need. You know, and I'm just using stroked paths to do this, but I can use shapes or any other path-based object. It's a path operation. Since I've now got this curved spline in here, if I go back to my blend options, right now the orientation keeps everything horizontal along that path, but if I change the orientation, it'll orient my shapes along the path. And maybe I come down here, grab my, maybe these are all too tight, I can widen that out, or let's say okay. I can always grab one of these and resize it, change how that works out. But I get, you know, quite a few different options. To do that same thing again, like I said, I can use more than just a single object. So if I'll grab an ellipse, do an ellipse there, copy and paste it. Maybe I'll move one over here, make it a little bit bigger. Copy and paste that. Move it down here. Even smaller. I can select all three of these shapes, or however many I need. Object, blend, make. This one, since I had three objects, it keeps that spline in there. If I just I could grab my pen tool or even my direct select. I'll just grab go to my pen tool, grab the anchor point tool. I can click on that spline and make it curved. It's actually probably a better thing to do though. Actually, whenever I clicked on that spline, it actually duplicated the one point and gave me more than I needed. So let's see here. Maybe it's just easier to do that with the pen tool if I want to change the spline on it. Select that spline as well as my blend, object, replace spine. That'll give me something a little more curved, a little nicer. That's kind of odd. That got weird. Let's do that again. What the heck was that all about? Blend, replace the spine. And then if I just go back to my blend options, change it from smooth color to specified steps. Basically, it places a step between every point on my spline. That's what it's doing. So even though I've only got one step, it's because I've got a couple of points kind of close together here that it's bunching them up a little bit. But so we can create blends that way as well. Blends also work with type. So if I got the year 2026, just increase this. I'll pick a nice heavy typeface. Duplicate it. Maybe I make the second one, instead of black, I make it a light gray. I can select both of those, make a blend. Blend options, go specified steps. So if you notice in this case, say okay. In this case, the lighter text is sitting on top, but I can change the order of that. Basically, it's just taking the layer order of these objects and creating the blend that way. So if I double click on this blend, I can select just this top text. I can arrange, send it to the back, and change the orientation of that as well. Maybe I got to deselect stuff. Create a circle. Maybe I delete a couple of points from it. So I've got just a quarter circle. Select all of that, replace the spline. And create that along a nice kind of curved path. Maybe I'll grab my lighter type. I can make the point size smaller. But I can kind of start quickly creating, repetitive shapes and that kind of thing without a whole lot of hassle. Go back to my blend options, change it from parallel orientation to align to the path. I don't really care for that, but you get the idea. Let's just cancel that. I'm just doing with black and white objects here, but If I want to create a pink or a orange circle, a dark red circle, and then a light orange circle. Select 3 of those objects, blend those, and it'll blend the colors up pretty nicely. Do that, replace my spline again. So, and again, if I double click on this, I can gain access to each of the 3 shapes. If I bring this middle shape to the front, object arrange, bring it to the front. Actually, I take that back. It won't let me do that. But I can change the size on things. Do that kind of thing. So the blend is pretty feature rich. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with it. Just remember that before you're done, you know, you really don't want to, it's just an appearance. So before you're done and finished, you really want to expand that for the individual shapes. And expand it again. And when you expand this stuff, it just creates a group out of it. But that's how blend works. You can also gain access, though, real quick to, like I said, there's a blend tool down here on the toolbar. And if I've got a blend object selected and I double click on that tool, it'll open up the blend options. Or if to use the actual tool, let's get that out of the way. Let's do that. And duplicate it. I can also use the blend tool on the toolbar. If I select it, it turns into this little blend. It takes on this blend icon. And I can click on points and blend between those. But then I still need to double click on that, change my number of steps. So I can create blends that way too, using the tool off of the toolbar. There's the tool on the toolbar, and there's the exact same set of features here under blend. Wherever you decide to access them from is kind of up to you. It will also, let's see what happens if I don't know that on a circle this is going to give me what I'm looking for, but if I select that point and this point, Usually when you use the blend tool, if you just want a straight blend on objects, you want to go from corresponding point to corresponding point. So like either the top point of the first one to the top point of the second one, bottom point, left or right, doesn't really matter. You'll get a very consistent blend from top to bottom. But if I select the top point on the first one and any of these other points, just try one and see what happens to it. You get different blends. So is the blend somewhat clear as to how it works? Yeah.
So fitting the blend between the circles with the colors,
Which one?
the one with the circles and the colors,
Okay.
how did you make it smooth?
How did I make the color blend smooth?
No, I got the color blend, but like you can still see like individual circles.
Oh, so the easiest way to make it smooth is either to just add a ridiculous number of copies, steps in between,
Yeah.
or the wider spacing on the ends have to do with the length of your handlebar length from your pen tool. So I think if you adjust those handlebars, this should help. That's always the trick with the spline. Sometimes you get, so, yeah, actually, you probably don't have enough. That's a few. Yep. So you have, yeah, some of these stops. Yeah.
Like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just a ridiculous amount.
It is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. You're right about that. That's the one thing about the blend tool. When you're creating shapes like that, it's kind of funky in that way. You know.
But if
It
you're,
depends upon what you're looking for. So, what you can do though to help with that, and if you were to expand that, and then unite that entire shape together, you'll get a whole ridiculous number of points. But there's a simplify tool, point simplification. It's called simplify. That I'll show you here real quick. That'll actually reduce those number of points significantly. So you can build a shape out, expand it, and then clean it up from there. Although if you expand it, here's just what it actually goes with. It'll give you all the individual shapes. And if you unite them, here's what the blend actually stays. That's one of those, yeah, ridiculous number of
so
points.
then what do I do?
Yeah. That's why I usually make the simple ones. And you know, you see, there are, you'll see people that work with Illustrator on Instagram and whatnot all the time, and they'll do a lot of these kinds of things. And yeah, they look really cool, but you still gotta make those usable in a production environment, you know? So, but that does create a ridiculous number of points, a ridiculous number of shapes to blend things that way. Usually if I'm gonna blend something that way, I'll manually make it in a different way. But depends on what you're creating for. Keep in mind too that, everything we're doing here is for print, basically, so everything we do, we gotta be able to convert to past. But if we're doing something that's gonna be used as like a JPEG file online, or just an illustration we're gonna save as a giant JPEG file, this is perfectly fine, because when I export it, I wanna get this look. So, we gotta work different ways for different uses of stuff. So, I think that's kind of what I would say about that particular example. is that it's better for exporting as a high res to file a JPEG file than it is as a print object. Image setters will eventually smaller image setters will have trouble with that shape. So, but you can make it. So, whenever I use the blend tool, I use it for things like the 2026, or if I just have a series of lines that I want to create as a gray tone, that kind of stuff. So it all comes down to how you're going to use the piece of artwork that you make. But that does bring up so I'm going to take this and I'm going to expand it. And then I'm going to go to my pathfinders and unite it. I'll probably lose the gradient. I do. And if I look at the artwork here, it creates, you know, to your point, just a ridiculous number of points along and through here. If I go back to my object panel, down to path, there's two, there's simplify and there's smooth. I'm going to choose simplify. And by setting this number, actually the default actually did a very nice job. Took a boatload of points out of that. So you can always simplify that way. Run the slider along and you can affect the number of points that you get. Simplify the shape. Then I just need to rebuild my gradient, but we're going to look at color next week, so I'll show you how to do that there. So anyway, that's the blend tool. Then, you know, if you create an object that's just too complex, has too many points, you can always simplify it under Object, Path, Simplify, and use that slider. All right, so that's the first one. Now let's take a look at, and a couple of these I want to kind of hit quickly so I can get down to envelope distort. But so if I just draw a circle here, I'm going to look at the repeat real quick. Draw a circle, and then with it selected, go Object, Repeat. And we've got a variety of different options. We've got radial, grid, and a mirror. We'll start with radial. If I do radial, it'll basically repeat those along a circle. And there's some little handlebars on it. If I grab the one at the top and drag it out, it increases the size of the radius and kind of spreads things out. And then down here at the bottom, there's a split. Well, I guess I should go clockwise. So the top one increases the radius of that radial. Then if I go to the right, there's this little dot with arrows in it, and if I slide it up and down, it'll increase the number of shapes that or number of duplicates that it makes. And then if I continue on around down here to 6 o'clock, this little split widget, if I grab one side of it and drag it this way, this basically creates a slice for what's going to be shown. So I'll drag that back down, drag this back down, and increase the number of points, and create a radial array that way. Whenever I'm done with that, I've got everything the way I want it. Object expand, we'll do away with the radial and just leave the objects behind. But I can create a radial array that way. The only thing I don't care for with the radial array is that if I need to resize this and I want to constrain it, so like I'm using circles here, but if I'm using, here, let me delete that and do something that's a little more, that you'll recognize a little bit more maybe from a project. If I have a thin rectangle like that, and I go repeat radial, and I increase the diameter on that, if I hold down the shift key, I can't constrain that to perfectly, for this top object to be perfectly constrained along my y-axis. It's always going to flop around. So there are objects we're going to have to create that require, tick marks around a radius and that kind of thing, and it's good for that sort of thing. Just keep in mind that I can't constrain this whenever I resize it. It just doesn't accept that shift key, which seems silly to me. So if I'm going to stretch this out, if I need all the tick marks on a clock, for instance, and I'm not careful, 12 o'clock's not really at 12 o'clock, There are other ways that I would actually do this normally, and I still always revert to the older way of doing it, which is moving my anchor point and rotating, 45 degrees at a time. But this does work for that kind of thing. If I need, a whole boatload of them, I can do that. The other radial, and this one I do use a lot. The other repeat is if I've got a rectangle or a shape of any kind, object, repeat, grid will create a nice grid of objects for me that I can increase the width on. If I drag the handlebar out, it'll just create more. I do use this one a lot on, I have an account where I've got to put a bunch of photos in a grid frequently, and it does work well for that. If I go to that repeat object, there is an options at the bottom. If I select options with one of those selected, I can manually type in the gaps between. So like I can make sure that the gap horizontally between each of my rectangles is 10 points, both vertically and horizontally. There are different grid types that you can choose. So it does have, some manual options that allow you to be specific on your gaps and that sort of thing. Say OK to accept it. And if I just pull this handlebar out, it will create more for as long as I need more. And again, when I'm finished with it and I've got what I need, object expand, and it puts them all into just a clipping group. So there's also, for repeat, there's also a mirror, but I don't really. Do that, select mirror, object, repeat, mirror. Gives me some control over mirroring an object. Handlebar up here, I can rotate it. But that's the mirror option. Again, once you're done using it, you really need to expand it so you get all your shapes. Oops. Grab that, object expand. And there we go. So those are those repeat tools. I'm going to skip objects on a path for right now and go down to just below blend. There's an envelope distort. And for me, the practical application of that is kind of this. Let me get all this stuff out of the way. Basically what envelope distort does is whenever you select an object and you apply envelope distort, it creates a mesh to warp it or modify it. So if I've got the line of type, Akron Marathon, and I'll just center it up. I'm actually going to I'll use this. Open up my spacing a little bit. And then I'm just going to create, I've got that done, and I'm going to put 2 lines above it. I'm going to put a line above it and a line below it. So grab my line segment. We'll do this. Give it a black stroke, maybe make it two or 3 points. And I'm just going to duplicate it below, copy and paste it. So I've got something kind of like this. And I'm going to leave my text as live type for now, but create an object kind of like that, and I'm going to group it. So if I go into my object panel, object menu, there's a grouping option where I can group all of these items together. So I'm just going to group those together. And then if I go to back to my object menu, down to envelope distort, there's a variety of different options here. So I'm going to start with make with warp. And what that gives us is a dialog that allows us to select from some presets, basically. Arc, we got arc lower, arc upper, arch, bunch of different options here that we can mess with. You can try out. And you can apply them either horizontally, like I've got it here, or if I, down here in the dialog, if I click vertical, it'll actually warp it vertically. But I'm going to go back to arc. And below all of that, I can adjust the bend on it just by moving this dialog here, or this slider here. I've got horizontal and vertical changes I can make to it as well. So if I slide vertical to like maybe 8%, you'll see that it kind of skews that object a little bit. If I go the other direction to minus 8%, it's going to go the other direction. Horizontal will do that with it. So maybe I go 47% there, but 8% is too much. Down to 4. And create a warp like that. So I'm going to move, but I'm going to move my horizontal and my vertical back to 0. And, actually, maybe my vertical, I am going to set it to like 7 or something like that. Say OK. So envelope distort will let me make warp objects like that. And if I double click on it, I can still go into my original group and adjust things if I need to. Like maybe I have to bump. That's weird. Undo that. Illustrator's been giving me some weird stuff lately. I don't think. Not super happy with it. Object, envelope distort, make with warp. Okay. If I need to go back and edit that after the fact, I can just go back to that object menu to envelope distort, edit contents, and it'll expand everything out, and I can work on it some more. So there's a bunch of things in there. You can create a banner, and then apply a warp, apply an envelope distort to it, and you get some interesting stuff. So I'm going to do the move on to, again, within envelope distort, there's a make with mesh option. So if I just type my name, and I'm just going to scale it up. If I select, what time we got? Okay. So if I select under envelope distort, make with mesh, it's going to bring up this dialog, and you notice it places this mesh over top of my type, and I can set the number of rows and the number of columns. The thing with make with mesh is the fewer rows and columns you have, the easier it is to work with. The more work you have to do and the more uneven it's going to be. So depends on what you're looking for, but I'm going to drop my number of rows to 2 and my number of columns to 3 and say OK. And now if I grab my direct select tool, I can grab one of these points and stretch it up. Stretch this one down. They've got handlebars on them, so I can move the handlebars to make those a little smoother, a little more natural. This middle one, if I move it, kind of see what it gets you. but I can deform things with a mesh this way. So make with a mesh. And like I said, the more points you have, the more difficult it is to work with. But we get some nice watery effects and that kind of thing. And then, before we're done with it, expand that. It creates a ridiculous number of points again, but we'll go to our object menu, down to path to simplify, and adjust that until we get something relatively reasonable. That's still a lot of points, but when you consider all of the different waves in it, it's really not that bad. So that's our envelope distort mesh. And last but not least, the one that I really like. Actually, mesh does you can get some kind of neat effects that way. So my last one is going to be make with the top object right here. So if I've got my type, and I'm just going to do my name again, and I'm going to do a real simple kind of a shape to start with. I'm just going to draw an ellipse on top of it. And if I select both of those objects, object, envelope, distort, make with top object, it'll contain it inside of that circle. So if I'm going to do my name, I'm going to set my first and my last name separately, two different items. Maybe I pick a different typeface. Maybe I grab I'll use alternate Gothic. And then I'm just going to create another circle, but I think across the middle of it, I'm going to draw kind of a wave with the pen tool. And instead of filling that with black for right now, I'm actually going to stroke it with white, just so I can see what I've got, and make it nice and thick. Make it a little gentler, I think. And then I'll just take that path and I'm just going to convert that to just that white path I made. Convert that to a shape, outline that stroke. And then I'm going to subtract it from the circle. Just a pathfinder operation like we've done a dozen times. And then I need to ungroup that because I need each of these individual shapes. So now if I select, let's see, let's grab the type. Let's make our point size a little bigger on my type. Now I'll just select the bottom shape and my last name. So I'm basically just doing this one and my last name. Grab both of those, object, envelope, distort, make with top object. And I'll do with the other one the same thing. Select the top shape as well as my first name. Make with top object. We can constrain type to any kind of a shape we've got. When I'm done with it, actually that probably needs a little bit of work. It fits it really tightly to the original shape. In this particular case, it kind of distorts our characters in a little bit of a way, makes them a little hard to read. So we could probably actually work with that a little bit, but I'm going to leave those. Actually, if I go in here, I'm actually going to take out some space between my characters. The way I did that was I just selected this object and I double clicked on it so I could go inside of it and then put my type tool in there to kind of tighten up my character spacing a little bit. When I've got it the way I like it, select those, expand them. Go back to our object, ridiculous number of points again. But go back to my path, object menu, path, simplify, and that cleans it up pretty well. I can do other things with it. Maybe I select those, grab those and make them a compound path. Copy it. Let's make them blue. Copy it. Paste it behind. Command B. Scale it down, make it white, maybe, then select both of them. Use my blend tool. Whoops, let's do it this way instead. Make something back there didn't work quite right. Curious as to what's back there that caused that. But if I double click into it, I can always copy this first. Oh, I had a weird shape in there. That's what caused it. I can always copy this out of there, paste it back in front, make that a lighter blue or a different color. But kind of start combining some of these different things. Or maybe I keep it blue. But give it a stroke. Something like that. But we can kind of start making some really kind of more dynamic shapes that way and objects. I find the envelope distort tools to be pretty useful for a lot of different stuff. That, for instance. Well, a couple of instances of blends. So anyway, but those, you know, we'll look at intertwine next time. This is about all the longer I really wanted to do the demo for. It's a little longer than what I really wanted. So, but blends and envelope distorts do have a lot of use, so kind of keep those in mind. We'll come back to the blend stuff a couple of times, and probably the envelope distort. So, any questions about any of those or anything you want me to